New York City. So much this place has to offer. And if you are an educator like myself, well, the possibilities are endless in providing examples of human achievement and progress in the city. That is why this week, let me show you something very special, the Intrepid Museum. When I began putting this video together, I realized there's just so much to show and talk about, and realistically, I did not want to put together like a 45 or a 50-minute video. It just might be too long, and I'll be honest, I just do not have enough time during my regular teaching semester to be making such long videos even if I wanted to. And to condense this location into a 15-minute video would just be so unfair, and really I would be doing a disservice to represent how much work and significance this place holds. And so I decided to separate the video into two parts. This week I will show you the USS Growler and the Concorde, while next week we will go on board the Intrepid itself. And believe me, if you want to visit this place and truly appreciate what it has to offer, you need at least like a half a day, if not more. And so even though I will show you a lot, it really doesn't cover everything you can experience with your ticket. And so before we begin, I just want to give a big shout out to the Intrepid Museum itself for allowing me to do this and really being gracious in accommodating me. So let's begin. Next to the Intrepid aircraft carrier, we have a submarine, Growler, which, by the way, is the only submarine in the United States that carried nuclear missiles and is open to the public to see, which makes it so much more unique. So, a little history lesson. The ending of World War II saw the world enter a new age of weapons and destruction. In the morning hours of July 16, 1945, the United States successfully tested a nuclear bomb, codenamed Trinity. Just few days later, two nuclear bombs were dropped against Japan, first being on August 6, 1945, on the city of Hiroshima, and second, 3 days later, on the city of Nagasaki. However, the United States was not able to hold on a complete monopoly on nuclear power for too long, as the Soviet Union successfully tested their own nuclear weapon in Kazakhstan in 1949. By then, both America and the Soviet Union were in deep competition and conflict with one another, being referred to as the Cold War. However, now the stakes were just so much more higher, as both sides had nuclear weapons, which, by the way, were becoming more and more powerful. In fact, by the end of 1952, we are talking about hydrogen bombs coming on the scene, which were just far more powerful and destructive than anything before them. In fact, let us see what would happen if we would drop one of these on New York City. Essentially, the city would stop existing to a certain extent. Pretty scary. Hence, in the United States, school children, for instance, were shown films like these, the famous duck and cover films, where kids were told to hide under their desks in case of a nuclear explosion. I love this scene, the guy hiding underneath the newspaper. Nothing better than a piece of paper against a force of 15 megatons of TNT and a sprinkle of radiation. But to be fair, if you were further away from the blast zone, then this would make some sense, as the shockwave would blow out windows and other debris, hence using anything to cover yourself would be useful in a way. But the closer you would be to the bomb itself, this made no sense, hence it really only played a psychological role more than anything else. And in the city like New York City, beginning in the early 1960s under President Kennedy, a program was launched where certain buildings were identified as fallout shelters for people to hide in. And as you see, few buildings still have these signs till this day, even though the program is long gone. But with this story of growing nuclear tensions, we have the entry of the Growler, In order to protect itself against any nuclear missiles, the United States launched a number of preventive measures, like Operation Chrome Dome, where B-52 bombers were up in the sky around the clock carrying nuclear weapons ready to be fired. Or having submarines like this one right here carry the Regulus missile. The missile had the capability of carrying a nuclear warhead. This submarine was capable of carrying 4 Regulus missiles, and that was its mission from 1960 to 1964, being hidden somewhere in the waters not far away from the Soviet Union, waiting for orders that they hoped would never come of launching the missile in case of a possible nuclear war. Now, I'm saying that they hoped this would not happen because, well, I mean, not just the nuclear war itself, right? But also for them, it was very dangerous to launch this missile, as they would have to go to the surface, set up the missile itself, which took some time, fire it, and then guide it to its target. All of this would expose them to enemy fire. And even though the range of the Regulus missile was just over 500 miles, its guidance system was more limited, which meant that the submarine had to be fairly close to the targets, hence increasing the danger of them being detected and engaged. All of this history is just really fascinating and there's a lot to talk about. However, here I'm just really introducing the topic itself without going into too many details. The submarine is also a very good example of how quickly technology was evolving during this time period, because it became obsolete and replaced only about 5 years into its operation, as by then the Polaris missile replaced the Regulus missile. So just like Regulus was named after one of the brightest stars in the sky, so Polaris too was named after the Polaris star. So the star itself is commonly known as the North Star. But the missile had almost tripled the distance of Regulus. And the revolutionary part was that it was capable of being launched from under the water, hence no longer exposing the location of the submarine. Plus, this submarine used diesel-electric engines, which needed air and ventilation. Hence, they were able to submerge underwater for a limited time running on battery. While nuclear-powered submarines, which were coming to service at that time, were capable of being submerged for, well, years, if it wasn't for these pesky humans on board and them needing food and things like that. But walking through the submarine, it's a really interesting experience. You know, it's one thing to spend few minutes and admire it, but another to really try to put yourself in the position of the crew at that time. You are out in the waters for a duration of about 2, maybe 2.5 months, a crew of about 90, in a confined space like this. I will tell you one thing, if you do not have claustrophobia, you just might develop one spending some time in a place like this. But it is just really cool to be able to look at everything from up close. You can even check out how many miles this submarine traveled. Well, nautical miles. Nautical miles are a bit longer than regular miles, and that in itself is an amazing topic, which will take us into 17th century ships, and even all the way back to the days of the Roman Empire. So, maybe in a future video. But getting through some of the spots is really tight. Like here, for instance, I couldn't just walk through holding my phone, I actually had to turn sideways to keep recording. Here you see what would have been really a top secret place at that time. From here, the Regulus missile would be fired and then guided to its target. Good that nearby there's a toilet. That is probably from where I would be screaming the instructions, being really nervous launching and guiding this thing. Here we have a room for the officers, and I love the fact that they put a book here with Hawaii as a title, because this submarine was stationed in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. So it's so clever to have this title of a book here, and it's probably a small detail that many people don't even realize. A pantry, and behind the pantry, a wardroom where officers would eat and hang out. And here you see the commanding officer's room, the captain's room. It is really the only private room on the submarine. For everyone else, well, there was no privacy. This is the control and attack room with the periscope and steering of the submarine itself. And a little bit behind it, we have the sonar room. A submarine would use active sonar. That is when you emit a pulse or a ping, what it's called, and you listen for a reflection of the sound back. Hence, then you can sort of judge things like the distance to the object. It's really sort of the same concept that bats are using. They ultimately have active sonars. But these give away your position. So there's also passive sonar. This is where you listen to your surroundings and the noise that other things make around you without you yourself omitting any sound. Hence, this is really what a submarine relies on, as it doesn't give away its position. This is the radio room. There is a shower, a washroom. When it comes to toilets, for instance, waste would be collected in a tank and then once in a while released into the water. That being said, here are the distillers, which purify the seawater, making it usable for the submarine and the men on board. The engine room, there are 3 diesel-electric engines which recharge the batteries. So when they were running, the submarine needed to be at the surface. But, there had to be a lot of noise in this room. 3 big, powerful engines in a confined space. I could just imagine the sound, the noise that it was creating. And finally, the torpedo room. But before I finish, I do want to show you one thing as sort of a preview of part 2 for next week. Because next to the Intrepid and behind the Growler, we have the Concorde, which was developed by a partnership between France and Britain, and it began operating in 1976. The plane flew faster and higher than any other commercial airplane. In fact, this one right here that you are looking at set the world record speed for a passenger plane back in 1996. It flew from New York to London in 2 hours and 52 minutes, a record which still stands to this very day. But wow, crossing the Atlantic Ocean in about 3 hours. Now, to those who were able to afford the tickets, this certainly was an experience. Not just in terms of flying, but also the food, champagne, you name it. The experience was luxurious from start to finish. But I highly recommend watching like a documentary about this plane. I'm sure there's something on YouTube about it. It's simply amazing. It flew at an altitude of 60,000 feet. Whereas like a typical commercial planes, they fly at about, 30,000 feet or so? So almost twice as high. And it had afterburners, just like a military jet, which allowed it to go twice the speed of sound. The other interesting thing, there's so many interesting things about it, but the other one is the fact that the nose of the plane tilted downwards to give pilots better view of the runway as they were landing. And as you see, Small wheels were also added to the back to make sure that the tail did not strike at the takeoffs or landings. They eventually retired in 2003, so something I really vaguely remember from TV at that time. But just another amazing thing to admire in this museum. And now, I will see you next week on board the Intrepid. You don't want to miss this. Until then, take care.